Thank you for coming. Welcome to our first Relatorium event for 2026. This is a new kind of forum for us. We're trying it out for the first time. It's a retrospective event where we look back at our sessions over the last year and take stock of themes that connect the various talks, things we learned, the difference that the year made for us. And we've invited back several of our speakers from last year. And so the idea is to keep this more informal and conversational. So everyone, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Hello, Shawei. Good to see you again. Um, I'm going to introduce the session by just saying, we're coming, several of us were in DC last week, where we had the opportunity to organize a special session on compassion as a mathematical practice at the joint mathematics meetings. And it went really well. This was our second year doing this, and it was even better than last year, which we had thought surpassed our expectations in the first place. So we're very much on a high. Grady was there for the first time in person. I met him. Grady has been a member of our group for several months now, even though he's not a mathematician. And he stayed for 2 days in the session through 20 plus talks. And one of the things we are very proud of from that session was that we managed to hold several roundtable conversations where the speakers sat together literally around in a circle with several of the audience members, and we had a conversation for half an hour every time. So this we did 5 or 6 times during the course of 2 days. Something unique that you don't typically see in math conferences. So this is the type of a difference that we at the Relatorium want to make in the practice and experience of mathematics. So we're very proud of that. And the year ahead is full of opportunities. But looking back at 2025, I think for us, it was a formative year. It was a year where, we've been growing. We've grown quite a bit, and we're very geographically extended, several time zones. And thankfully, with the help of Namista, and I'm calling her out now, she just joined as well. We, over the last few months, have been discussing the possibility of putting together this talk. So Namista is based in Canada as well. Maybe Namista, I'll invite you to say hello, say a couple of things about yourself.
Hi. Yeah, sorry I'm late.
No worries.
Nice to be attending. Also, just a heads up that I might have to move in and out just because I'm kind of using 2 screens. I'm at a work meeting on the side, but I really wanted to join. I'm Namista. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm working in the nonprofit industry currently, and my expertise is in business research and communication. And I've been with this group since 2024 on and off. And since then, we've just seen some amazing strides in some of the stuff that we've wanted to do around compassionate mathematics and research and how, excuse me. Sorry about that work call. A lot of different legitimate work that we've recognized just through our discussions alone around the need for a more interdisciplinary, inclusive approach to researching, practicing, and teaching mathematics so that more and more people are able to see different pathways into entering this realm. And we've seen, a lot of you might already have lived experience around this, but how the diversity of people who are working in this space currently could be made more varied if we had more opinions and perspectives going into the practicing of it. So I'm really excited about the work this group has done and being a part of it. And, this look back event is a great opportunity to reflect on that.
Thank you, Namista. I also want to call out Priya one more time in front of everyone as well, because this is, this really wouldn't happen without her. Just to give you a very, very brief background, we got together in early 2023, after I had been introduced to the Topos Institute for about a year and a half or so before. And at some point, when they got to know me enough, they said, "You really have to meet Priya." So thanks to Brendan for making this introduction. And I had no idea what compassionate math was. And it's hard to imagine now a time when I didn't, because it's become such a big part of how I teach, how I think of myself, and that's all thanks to Priya, really, and as well the group itself. I mean, Priya introduced me to so many people who themselves it mushroomed. It literally did. So Priya, I don't know if you should be very proud. I don't know if you want to say a word or two about how this has come together.
Thank you, Ted. You're being very kind. This is a joint work. This is
Compassionate.
a teamwork, right? Like it's amazing to work with all of you, and it's like I was just there and things were happening, and how the relatorium started, and it has given me good like opportunities to bring in like very interesting speakers, including Shave, who we have here today, and like to bring these. Very varied topics, like including like knitting in mathematics. This was like a dream come true for me. So it has been a great journey to work with all of you and to make this happen. It's like the seed has been nurtured and it has been growing by the joint effort of all of us, and it's being cultivated so beautifully. So thanks, Ted, and thanks to the entire Relatorium group for making this happen and providing me this opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Mm, you're welcome, of course. So this idea for doing the online seminar, the whole YouTube channel and everything, started back in the spring of 24. We had been working together for a little over a year, several of us, and we'd been doing at the time. I remember something we called the Math Art Dictionary, another idea of PS where we could use art to demonstrate abstraction in mathematics. We were presenting at a JMM back then here in San Francisco, and that's where we met Irfan. And the rest, in some ways, is history, literally, because Irfan has been a steadfast member, contributor, innovator for us, and he introduced us to several of the other people that now have joined our fold. Um, Irfan, do you want to say a word or two about how you've come to this?
Um, I was not prepared to say anything, but yeah, basically, I
Make it
think
up.
it was just a lot of coincidences that happened. I did not know anything about this group, and I was actually preparing to go into philosophy at the time that we met at JMM. So the talk at which we met was in the session on mathematics and the arts, and I was giving a talk on my artistic process, which was something new for me. I had been a mathematician most of my life, and I thought I could not do art. But around the time when I had decided that I want to work on philosophy of mathematics, and I was just broadening my academic work, I started learning about certain artistic things I could do outside of mathematics, and I just did not know I could have done those things before. So I was giving a talk on that process and how that is similar to the artistic process within mathematics. And that's when we met. And so at that time, I think it was a good opportunity for me to connect with more people who are working in advocacy in mathematical spaces, because that was my main motivation for trying to go into philosophy, trying to work on advocacy in a philosophical way. I ended up not being able to go back to grad school for philosophy, so I'm still doing math, uh, and in a sense, maybe that has given me a chance to continue contributing more to this group. So I guess it ended up well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Irfan. Yeah, I mean, I think that I want to demonstrate how things have just come together in an unplanned manner and how sometimes that leads to beautiful outcomes, including the fact that I'm calling out people without preparation. This wasn't meant to be a prepared speech. So thank you, Irfan. So, when we started this in April of 24, this online seminar, and we didn't know where it was going to go. We had no idea how YouTube works or many of the practical things we now know. So by the end of that year, as we were about a year ago, as we were planning to get started in 25, I will say we had hit a high on our viewership. Unbeknownst to us, a talk that one of our members who isn't here with us at the moment, Daniel Filonik, actually hit over 1,000 views. And we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? We've hit that landmark. So what's next for us? Yeah. And by the way, that talk was about algebras, abstract algebras. So it goes to show, you never know exactly what's going to hit a nerve. But what we set out to try to do last year, and this is now where I'm framing it for all of you guys, was several things. One of the goals was to write more. Nathan, who's here, an old group member with us, Nathan advised that we do some writing. We try to push the word out in various fora, and especially around what is it that we mean with compassionate mathematics. So we all got to write various pieces, and we wove them together in a dialogue, and then we met Mal. We met Mal through through Irfan and Matt Marinsel, who unfortunately hasn't joined yet. But yeah, so and this was into the space of mathematical education and the philosophy of mathematical education. So Mal, can you say a couple of words about how you saw us?
Yes. So thank you so much for having this group and for just condensing this energy that just feels so amazing. So let me say a few words about myself. I've been a journal editor for at least 8 years. I think it might be 9 now. And as well, I'm a book editor. So I think that we get the best visibility of what we do if we actually publish. So first thing to publish is to publish. I see this as a part of philosophy. So Relatorium will be publishing a Springer book about philosophy of mathematics education. And I'm the honor to be the corresponding editor. So fingers crossed. I hope we'll publish by November 2026. They're on the last stages of assembling the book. So I mentioned that I'm a journal editor, and I entirely see that a special issue of my journal could be about compassionate mathematics, and in particular its practices in a classroom. So any practice that is motivated by compassion could be described in an article, and we are not very heavy on statistics and data. We're more heavy on conceptual writing. So that's part of me. The other part is I'm a Buddhist, and Buddhists, they talk a lot about compassion, like analyze it, divide it into small pieces, look at it. And so in my Buddhist classes, we have a lot of discussion about compassion. I'm so happy that I can connect those two things, my professional thinking and my spiritual path in one project. So thank you so much for having it.
Thank you, Mal. That felt really validating for us to start to be taken seriously within a community we didn't directly know. I'm a mathematician by training, and even though for many years now, 16, 17 years, I've been teaching at the pre-college level, after a career in academia, I was always an outsider in the formal space of education. And so this was great. We organized a session, even in-person session, at the sectional meeting of the AMS, where we invited some more people that we were introduced to through Mal. And so the visibility that we get, the legitimacy, if you will, that we get on that side is very welcome. Of course, a big theme for us had been for a while from the beginning, because the roots, as I mentioned, somewhat incidentally, but the roots of our work had come through my interactions with the Topos Institute and the whole idea of applied category theory as a bridge to begin with between mathematics and theoretical computer science, and then slightly more broadly with philosophy and some other fields, physics and so on. Through that, the computer science had played a big role from the very beginning, sort of computational thinking, if you will, and of course its connections with AI. And we can't avoid it. We're living through that era. So people like CB, for example, or REM, who are joining us, or of course Wei for that matter, that have done quite a bit of work in this field, contributed significantly, in talks and I remember. I mean, we started having talks about AI and its impact on mathematics, even through Irfan. When Irfan, in his previous postdoc, he was at Penn, he invited these two students that he knew who were starting a company to use an AI tutor, and we put that AI through its paces. I remember that was a couple of years ago, right, Irfan? Are you still in touch with
Right.
them?
That was the second Relatorium talk before we started live streaming. So that was
Right,
the last talk that we did not live stream.
right.
But no, I'm
And
not in touch with them. That was maybe the last time I was in touch with them was around that talk. I was anyway moving away from Penn around that time.
Mhm.
Um, but
But
yeah.
what I was going to say is a little while, a few months later, Rem talked to us about his work on. I mean, he had just finished his math PhD, but he talked to us about his ideas that were relating to categorical notions that might be useful in AGI. And I know that Rem is organizing or giving a talk soon about that. So maybe Rem, do you want to say a couple of words about how that has come about?
Oh yeah, hi. Thanks for having me today. So yeah, I met this group through AGI actually, because I was at AGI 24 back in Seattle when I had the occasion to meet in person David Spiva, who redirected me toward this group. As Ted said, my research area of interest. Sorry, today I'm a bit cold. Is category theory and the application of categorical methods into AI and AGI. Now, what I'm personally interested is, of course, AI companions. So now I have switched my research towards blockchain technologies. My main interest is episodic memory, right? So I do believe that categorical semantic can provide blockchain like data architecture that can store and retrieve episodic memory and integrate through cycles in order to get like a proper a proper cognitive architecture, or at least part of a cognitive architecture in the form of memory modules for AI companions. So this is pretty much where I'm at and what I've focused on my research for the last part of 2025. Anyway, happy New Year to all. And I will share in the chat the link that I've also sent by email for my next talk if anyone is interested.
Thank you, Ram. That's fantastic. And I want to also call out Nick in this context. Nick is a former student of mine who has recently completed his PhD in computational neuroscience. And so but before that, he worked on a number of AI companies and eventually decided instead to return to academia. So he gave a talk, in the fall where he was trying to connect the lessons we're learning from understanding the brain, in this case, monkey brains, and possible connections to AI architecture and where we can go from there. So, Nick, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words about your path from AI to the biology and neuroscience at back and your talk.
Yeah, I'm here mainly to listen and learn. And yeah, as Ted said, I bounced around a little bit from math to computer science and AI and now neuroscience. And thanks all of you for organizing Relatorium. I've seen a number of the talks and live streams and recordings, and it's fantastic. And it's great to learn a little bit more about the history. And I'm also interested to hear more about what's to come of this initiative.
Mhm. But do you think that well, two things that I will ask two things of you specifically because I know you a little bit. I know your history a little bit more than some of the others. You mentioned this transition from doing math, pure math, to immersing yourself in machine learning environments and sort of understanding what motivates those, and then even taking the further step to immerse yourself in the biology, in the messy sort of biological engineering of interfacing with brains and learning from actually gathering data before you go back to the abstraction. So navigating all those spaces, I mean, what has that experience been like to always kind of go into the unknown and not necessarily play by the book and stay with the thing you understand well?
Um, how has it been? I guess I don't mind embarrassing myself in any field. So yeah, I don't mind being out of my comfort zone a little bit and exploring new things. And I kind of like the sense of adventure of dipping into a new field and hopefully there are connections to be made between all these fields. I don't know if I've quite landed on them yet, but still searching.
So, I mean, this is what I had in mind because part of compassion in my mind is that openness to the unknown, is taking the perspective that no matter what we feel we know and what we're proud of having figured out, what really attracts us is the things we don't know, the ways in which we are wrong or come short, or other perspectives. Opening up the possibility that something else, another way of seeing the same problem or this mathematics or AI or whatever it is, intelligence, other perspectives informed by different backgrounds, different ways of thinking are, perhaps even more valuable because the best thing we can do is open our mind to other possibilities of being, right? Other possibilities of understanding the world. And I think that in my mind, that is an indispensable part of a compassionate approach in education, in research, in communication. And I think you embody that very well. You've come several times. I mean, several of the people in this group have visited my classes over the years, but you've come probably the most because I've known you the longest. And I can say that you also demonstrate a sort of a humility, despite varied and actually very impressive experiences you've had, years at DeepMind, for example, among other things. But you always embody this approachability that my students have valued repeatedly. And so I know firsthand what difference this makes when you're communicating, especially to young people or people who are ambitious, who want to know more, and to essentially open conceptual doors to people. I think this is what we're after. So it's a very good example in my mind of the practices we look to cultivate. And speaking of education as well, I want very much to call out CB because he's been someone who I've been introduced to very early on in my interactions with Topos, and he's a student of an old friend of mine, John Baez. And I know from the get-go, before I even knew Priya, people at Topos, Brendan and David and so on, tell me, you have to meet Christian. He's working in a category here, and he thinks he can apply it to education. and so it took a while for us to connect, and then he came and went a few times in the group, and I wonder, and I know he has his own venture, right? You're working on your company on Holdia, right? And so, can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about how you bring together mathematical abstraction with the questions of interacting with learning new things, new ideas?
Well, basically, I I got to do some cool projects in grad school, but I was not sure what I wanted to do for my thesis. And basically, I spent a summer when Topos was opening, and I was introduced to string diagrams for two categories and double categories. Basically, yeah, it was kind of a light bulb moment that made me realize that visual language could be powerful enough to um, make complex ideas very simple, like simple enough to actually be like child's play kind of thing. So that really brought everything together for me and realized like I did something like that for the thesis, and then since then I've been trying to make an interface um, for these string diagrams, and it's been going really well. It was hard for a while doing it like all the programming alone, but it's gotten better, and this year it will be a real app. I look forward to showing it at some point. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Do you have any specific
No, I mean, well, yeah,
question?
we'd love to see it, but yeah, no, this idea, you see, I think it's very central to our efforts, and it was very inspiring to see your prototypes where you shared them with us on a couple of occasions. This idea that abstraction, which often seems the core of what's inaccessible about mathematics, can in fact be wielded as a resource to make the ideas more accessible for mathematics. It's almost a the contradiction in terms, right? That and I know that Eugenia Chang, for example, attempts to do that and has in fact succeeded on many occasions to do that. But it doesn't, from the outside, from people who are non-practitioners, this seems counterintuitive. How is it that something like category theory, that seems the least accessible part of mathematics, can actually facilitate sense making? I know Rem has thought about it, and so maybe you can tell us a little bit about from your perspective.
Yeah, I think the simplest message or big realization of category theory is that thoughts are connections, like that every thought is just some kind of connection between things, and we have discovered this fully general language of connections and transformations. And I think our community is in a weird situation because the scope, the scale, or the gravity of such a realization is so huge that our small community, like, it's not easy to bring such a big idea to the world. Um, so I do think that visualization and visual language will play a huge role in that,
Mm-hmm.
and in helping people connect to this
Mm-hmm.
idea that we already have a universal language, and it's actually really simple. Um, yeah.
I like that. I like that's very good. Also, as you were talking about thoughts being connections, I couldn't help but think at something I didn't mention before I should have mentioned, that one of the things that Mal introduced to this group is connections with psychology. And I think part of the study of the psychological basis of sense making involved precisely that, foregrounding the connections, the compositionality of the stories we build to tell ourselves the analogies, to use also Rem's methodology, that the metaphors and analogical thinking that we do. But it feels that almost, I mean, it's said differently, that the semantic space is populated by connections, by rather than by objects in themselves. And so finding the right language to describe that, it does seem like a categorical perspective will help, because that's what we do when we lift from sets to categories, let's say, essentially, right? Is look at the connections.
Yeah, I mean, like when I say that to people, that thoughts are connections, they're like, they kind of get it. And then I remind them, like, well, you know how literally every sentence expresses a predicate of some things, that every sentence is of the form subject predicate. Everybody remembers that. And yeah, so people could actually be like, if you find the right direct way of framing it to them, they could actually be like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, that makes total sense. Like it's all just connections.
Speaking of things making sense, if you see them the right way, and the connections and the diagrammatic language, I can't help, of course, but call out Nathan, who has been a long-time member of this group, and who has background in both philosophy and computer science and math. And at this point, what I want, Nathan, for you to tell us, perhaps since you've been with us for so long, also, and you've seen many evolutions, you've helped organize sessions for us and so on. But like, from your perspective, how would you describe this idea that CB just shared, that thoughts are connections, and that we're looking for a better language to describe that, and it will make a difference in the way we teach and communicate mathematics?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. We have a snow day today, so my kids are home, and so I'm laying low in the basement while they roughhouse upstairs. But yeah, so this question about thought is relational, and I think also maybe inferential is another nice word. But I think the challenge that I've run into in some of my work with making it diagrammatic is that it's both it's almost too general, right? It's something that people can understand in the abstract, but it's also hard to convince them that uh, uh, you can kind of fully formalize it in a way and show them the extent at which we can capture thoughts diagrammatically in the inferences that we make from them. And I think in some ways, a lot of the work that I do is trying to both make that idea very intuitive and appealing, but then also show that it has a formal background. And yeah, and that poses, I think, some of its own challenges, especially being uh, kind of, so I think Nick made this point. I think a fair number of us, right, we kind of go between different fields. And when you try to do that, it poses its own challenges.
Right, including the fact that different literatures, right? We have to familiarize ourselves, for example, with the literature and pedagogy that you are familiar with, or the literature in philosophy. I find myself often delving into that, and these are deep dives because you see literature is scholarly literature is another big network, a connection of things. So everything derives meaning from the connections that insiders understand are there, but from the outside it's problematic. So this is part and parcel of the interdisciplinary nature of what we set out to do, right? And you play critical, or have played for a while, critical role for us in that respect. I love how, and it's very proper for a philosopher to do that, you're juxtaposing it almost like without intending to, or certainly makes it feel natural, and to juxtapose two such core typically diametrically opposite ideas in mathematics, namely intuition and formalism. We've had plenty of conversations in our weekly meetings about, where you strike the balance in between, and there's long traditions on this. But the idea that you articulated just now, that this is a challenge that our group, our goal is facing, right? At the same time, we've been very successful at appealing to people at an intuitive level, at making things more accessible to people, which is, after all, a pillar of what we set out to do, make it more accessible, right? To invite people, to allow people to construe what it is that we're doing, the compassionate math, in a way that makes sense to them. This is very much part and parcel of what we're after. At the same time, though, we tend to, several of us have articulated ideas around this. Some people I mentioned already, Ren, you, me, CV, but also Matt, for example. We had a very nice conversation last week, and unfortunately he couldn't join us today, but Matt also proposed a different, formulation of this sort of thing. Earlier, Edmund, another member, longtime member of our group, who's, not here, has done the same thing. So, but formalism seems to be almost the opposite of intuition. Like it seems to me almost like making things less accessible. Let's say, and it isn't so. It isn't so in the sense that what we're seeking is some sort of synthesis, right, between the two. But this is I think is a good way to describe where we're at the moment. We're seeking to both we're seeking to add more formalism, deepen into the what is it that this means? How can we see that in ways that allow more inferencing, more deeper thinking, like the tools that mathematics has, but at the same time without giving up the accessibility, which is the goal in the first place, without giving up the inclusivity. That was the raison d'etre for doing it. So it's a very fertile juxtaposition. I think this is a very good way to point where we're at. Irfan.
Yeah, as you were just saying in the last minute or so, I realized that just formalism without much intuition is not worth much, and the same way intuition without at least a minimal amount of formalism is not worth much, because then what are you talking about intuitively if you cannot formalize it at all? But yeah, if all of math is reduced to just formal proofs that are checked in lean or something, and there is no intuition for someone to who can read that code and understand what was actually happening in the proof, then I think that's kind of a sad situation. But on the other hand, if there are no formal proofs, that's also a sad situation, because then we are kind of getting away from what math really is. So there has to be a balance. Yeah.
So at this point, with this very apropos comment, I want to also call out Shawei, because I know that he's done a lot of work in this space between formalism and intuition. I mean, and he held some high-profile positions and tried to influence his senior member of Topos and so on. So how did you see this balance play out in various settings, Shawei, and where from your perspective, where do you think the right balance can be struck between intuition and formalism, between inclusivity and sort of deepening?
Thanks a lot, Ted. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. It's really noisy here at Starbucks, but I'd say that
okay.
Formalism is something that we use to see different slices of intuition, different facets of intuition, and one of the big beliefs I have in my work, which is primarily in program synthesis and even in spiking networks. The thing that has really guided me is this idea of refinement. So refinement is the idea that you start with a formalism, and then over time you refine it to add more features. And in other words, all the things that you're designing from neurons to code has to respect this process of refinement. It should be able to adapt to changing specifications. It has to adapt to changing amounts of information. And I think the nice thing is that category theory allows us to talk about refinement in a very precise way. I think my favorite model of refinement is that of the lens, where you have an arrow going one way that represents things being decomposed or being refined, or and the other direction is what I call simulation, where you take all the different components and then you kind of compose them together and have a model of what is it that you're trying to simulate or trying to understand. And so in refinement and simulation, they kind of work in opposite arrows, and there's a very precise way to talk about this in category theory, which I love a lot. Yeah.
Thank you for that. This is precisely, I think it's striking the balance right. In other words, even your very description in few sentences that you just made was both evocative of a really cool idea that I'm going to try to unpack a little bit, but also a formalism that supports it. So the two aren't opposing in some sense, but the way in which they're not opposing, I think we need to demonstrate through practice, through examples, through for example, in a different setting, through using these ideas in a classroom or in designing a program or some setting where this can play out, rather than feeling like we can reduce it down to just an abstract set of axioms, let's say. I mean, not that that's not important, that is important, but I don't think it's accessible, So demonstrating through examples is a big practice here. But to unpack a little bit more what you were just saying, I think, aside from the fact that you made a good case for categorical perspectives to be a useful language for doing this, I think what I'm hearing you imply is that any formalism in some ways is incomplete by definition, and it's something we need to embrace. It's part and parcel of the idea of formalism. This is not, in other words, a bug, it's a feature. And so it is open, right? And this is a place where it can become more inclusive, right? The idea of inclusivity, one of the ways in which I like to describe it is the yes and mentality, the fact that compositionality, the fact that new perspectives can be, even if they seem contradictory at first, what they do in juxtaposing with existing perspectives is to conjure up a higher level object that can hold them together, higher level kind of algebra or whatever, like some level of abstraction, another layer of abstraction, right? So it's a perspective on the world, right? We could have stayed at the level where we see things as contradicting one another, right? But instead, we're promoting this idea that we can always and endlessly do this, essentially, and this idea of conjuring a high level of abstraction that can hold the opposing ideas together, and that is in some ways intrinsically a source of innovation, of innovative thinking, of like new ways of being that you didn't think were possible before. And I mean, to link with a more a notion of compassion that we've been leaning into more recently, it elicits positive passions in us. In other words, it's joyful, right? It leads to the sense of enlightenment, to refer back to Mal, right? In other words, compassion as a way of embracing the whole, rather than excluding, which is cumbersome and also invoking, kind of passions that are more protective, fear, things like that, So we've come to be thinking of compassion in recent months, and this played out in the session at JMM last week, as maybe with passion. In other words, it's another way of thinking what compassion could perhaps mean, right? Literally, with passion. Which, what I mean by that is, let's allow for the passions that drive the humans who are the mathematicians, right? Who do the mathematics and the physics and the computer science and the philosophy, to come through. In other words, rather than hide behind some facade that what we're doing is dispassionate, is objective, is outside of us. Let's embrace the possibility that it's really of us, right? That's what we're doing it because it matters to us, it matters to humans. And if it matters to humans, that means it stimulates, some emotional centers, right? It's emotively annotated, to use kind of more neuroscience term, right? So if we acknowledge that as mathematicians, then we can talk more intelligibly about different I'll use a formal term, different model institutions, for example, that our friend Matt talks about, and how we can translate between them, or how we can develop institution-free approaches that allow multiple perspectives to actually interact with one another in constructive ways. How do we build protocols for trust engendering, right, between setups, different axiomatic systems, for example, right? After all, this is, I believe, a core concern within AGI, or just in any case, our understanding of AI, right? I mean, they come, AI, whatever it is, even in its current instantiation, is something very different than human intelligence. Whether we agree that whether it's intelligent or not, in any case, it comes from a very different background. So how could we work together with it? Because whether we like it or not, we're going to have to work with AI in one capacity or another, and AI will evolve. So figuring out ways to describe and compose the senses that create meaning for us. And for humans, passions matter, right? I mean, let's just face it. That's what gives us a sense of what's important. Why would we choose this rather than something else? And um, without, I guess digressing too much, I do want to acknowledge David, who just joined us. And in particular, I want to say 2 words and then give you the floor, David, to say something too. But I consider myself very lucky to have met David through Topos as well. Topos is the gift that keeps giving. And Brendan and David were very nice to, David Spivak were very kind to invite me to actually David Stern's talk last summer. And that became the instigation of a collaboration, a friendship. And so David talked at the Relatorium, was there in DC as well. And David is someone who brings a lot of experience bridging the 2 realms as well, having been a researcher in mathematics and then having devoted much of his life for the last over 10 years in outreach and in making mathematics relevant to world problems, right? So this is where David, I'm going to cede the floor to you, but please, the connection I'm looking for here is, what difference can this make, whatever it is that we're doing, whatever you've seen us try to do, to the real world? What difference can we make to make the world better?
All right. Thank you, Ted, I'm sorry I couldn't join earlier. I've just finished my meetings for the day, and so I was glad to see you were still on and thought I would just join as I could.
Thank you.
I guess I don't have anything big to say here other than that I found it very interesting and valuable to sort of join these discussions. As you say, a lot of my work now is really coming from the social impact side. So we start there, and it's the fact that it keeps coming back, and the maths, it does come back as being useful. And so one of the things that I really appreciate about my experiences with this group is the thoughtfulness of this relationship between how, as mathematicians or as mathematically minded people, we can be contributing more to the social challenges our societies are facing. People talk about the polycrisis of the moment we're in, but I think it is a moment where I believe there's a real need for us to think how, as we can use what we have been learning from mathematics through history, but also more recently, to be able to not just create tools which are technologically advanced, but leaving society and humans, sort of extracting from society and humans, but actually putting back to using those same skills, those same tools, to be able to enhance society and human. And the best term I've heard from this, I was introduced to by some philosophers from Germany, still working on AI and the ethics of AI. And they talk of human flourishing, which I'm sure is a term many of you are familiar with. But thinking about technology and how these mathematical skills can be used for human flourishing. And so I guess the one thing that I've enjoyed about these interactions is that there seem to be a community of people who are thinking about and trying to to work towards mathematical sciences as a tool for human flourishing. Actually, I will say one more thing, which is that when I sort of was presenting at the joint maths meetings, and I was very grateful to have been given the chance to think about these things in a different way. One of the things which I recognized was that there's a real opportunity, I think, right now where AI is being disruptive in education, in many other areas, for us to think through how could we imagine things working in ways which are really very different. And when I started thinking about that, I recognized that I fell into the trap that I think many people do, particularly mathematicians, when thinking about complex social problems. And I oversimplified. And I think, I thought through logically what one aspect of it without actually fully recognizing the complexity. And so my talk was about collaboration and thinking about mathematics collaboratively. And as I was preparing for it, I totally redesigned the talk as I realized that this is something which is much more complex because of the nature we as mathematicians have had with competition being central to our education, and really thinking through, well, what would it, is it actually the world we want to live in which throws that away? There is value to that, to be had for that as well. So I think one of the things that I want to, to just put out there is that as these discussions have been valuable to me, part of their value is in the fact that I believe there's a willingness to engage in the complexity and to have the discussion, which isn't about necessarily finding solutions, but recognizing that contributions in this are likely to be the same with any wicked problem. We're going to have to sort of think about what are the steps we want to take, but without thinking necessarily of what are the solutions we're looking for. So that's maybe the one thing I wanted to just add and say.
That is perfect, David. That's exactly right. And I must add, you did a fantastic job in DC improvising. I think, aside from anything else, which I'm going to talk about, the substance of what you said, but also the very practice that you demonstrated, this sort of improvisational leaning into the discomfort of the new as you were making it, was so apropos for what we're setting out to do. But in terms of the substance of what you're saying, I think this absolutely needs to be said. You're talking specifically in the example about competition versus collaboration, right? And we're obviously clearly here to support collaboration, both philosophically, that's what we set out to do, but also your talk was, it was titled Collaboration in Mathematics. But as you're setting out to do that, to foreground the value of the opposite. Let me just say that, right? The value of the other side. This is part of what we're after. Part of, for example, of what Nathan talked about earlier, the juxtaposition, you weren't here, but he talked about the juxtaposition of the intuitive and the formal, right? We find ourselves right at the cusp between the two. We value both. We must acknowledge as mathematicians that we value both. The answer isn't one or the other, it's both. It's the yes and, but how do we conjure that layer, that higher abstraction layer that can hold them both in a constructive dialogue with one another, not in reducing them to something, simpler, but in elevating them. So the in-between, right? The fact that some measure is called for of everything. The language is lacking. I think colloquial language is lacking. And that's where mathematical language, the level of abstraction that category theory allows us to apply, might be helpful through analogy, to enlarge our cognitive vocabulary, right? The space of things that we consider possible And so we know what it is that we're after, right? And so again, David, thank you for doing that. The other thing I should say at this point is you teed it up for Grady so well. So Grady, let me introduce Grady at this point. He's been with our group for several months now. He's not a mathematician, but he's a very thoughtful man who has been contributing great ideas in our conversations and has specifically an uncommon gift at word creation and putting together things in impactful sentences. And I have to say that from the get-go, months ago when he first joined us, and it was Irfan who introduced us to Grady, he's been trying to basically articulate something along the lines of what David was talking about, the difference that we as mathematicians, the compassionate mathematicians, if you will, can make in the framing of the world today. So Grady, here you go.
I'm so glad to be here. It's my Christmas wish list. What do you want for Christmas? And it would be to participate in a math advocacy group. 3 years ago, I journaled to my activist group colleagues. I live in a suburb outside Philadelphia. I'm a retired public transit administrator, and my activist group has an action group for every social issue: immigration, climate change, interfaiths, etc. And I'm interested in social justice and math advocacy. So I said, why don't we think about a group that we will name Math Advocates, and it would be persons who, as it turns out, several years later, are the people right on my Zoom screen. But at that point in my stage of thinking, I said it would be a group of math-minded persons, mathematicians, and non-phobic persons who would come together and use their mathematical orientation to engage social issues. So this was in April of 2021. And after I'd been with the group for a while, I sent the journal to Ted and I said, isn't this the universe answering my request? When I met Irfan while he was at the University of Pennsylvania, we have a mutual friend, an artist named Harold Lash. And when Harold told me that Irfan was this amazing melange of philosopher, mathematician, and artist, I couldn't wait to meet him. And we had coffee in his office one afternoon. And I asked him, I said, well, Irfan, how does the practice of mathematics affect your consciousness, your understanding of yourself as a human being? And it just seemed to me that such high levels of thinking over years could not but have an impact on your consciousness and awareness. So he made a few responses, and then he said, the question that you're phrasing, I think you should ask it to this group that I belong to, and you are that group. So that has been sort of in the background of my mind as I've participated these many months. I started in March of last year. And the contribution that I take away from every gathering of our discussion is this. The problem with social justice is the problem of identity. And for better or worse, the way I could be maybe on shaky ground here, but in terms of how Western logic operates, the law of the excluded middle or non-contradiction is the basis for sense making. You are defined by what you're not. So Palestinians are not Jews, Caucasian Americans are not African Americans. You're defined by what you are not. And what relational thinking, which is the basis of a lot of categorical application and mathematical thinking, is to understand that the identity and sense of things is not an immediate gestalt understanding that's illusory and deceptive, and that who and what we really are is really a set of relationships. And what mathematicians have accomplished is they have shown that how relatedness thinking can help one get a better sense of identity and what things are. And just imagine how that concept and that vision could impact discussions regarding peace, regarding reconciliation, on the whole range of issues. When I think about the Relatorium, I think of a alternative name or a coincidental name is the Imaginarium. And it is a space where persons can conceive of a world in which all of the conflicts and oppositions, the contraries and contradictions are not eliminated, at least initially. I mean, David was talking about the process of engaging the challenge, and that what our way of thinking and communing does is that it allows us to envision and imagine what it looks like when opposites coexist at the same time in a dynamic way, and that you hold this seemingly senseless or nonsensical vision by embracing it with joy and love.
Thank you, Grady. This is what I was hoping for. You weren't there when this group was named, and I have to give credit to another member of our group who's not here with us at the moment, Neil. Um, Niels is also in Tallinn, and he came up with the name Relatorium. It was he's very creative. He's a category theorist working on logic, and you should have been there, Grady, because this was an instance of an aha moment, and we all clung to that. But I love the idea that through relations, through relational thinking, and this relates, by the way, to what CD and Nathan were talking about earlier, that our thoughts, especially our innovations, the imagination, as you said, the what if, the possibilities, are relational, our connections are basically almost like one way to visualize it from in my mind. They're like edges, or basically like vectors looking to a task somewhere, dangling ends that are looking to say, well, what if it connects here? What if it connects there, kind of thing, but we're looking for a a way to empower this an openness to innovation that still is grounded on solid formalism, on a clear-headed understanding of inferences and consequences of what we're saying. This is mathematics, after all, right? Like, we are doing mathematics. One of the things we've had the hardest time convincing others, but we're still doubling down on our efforts for this, is that this very process that we're after is itself mathematics, is itself a mathematical process. It's one aspect of it is reimagining how to represent mathematics in novel ways, but itself it's a mathematical process. And so, the notion that while we live in a mathematical universe, which means that anything to say has myriad consequences, right? And we mean much more than what we actually are able to say. So how can we make sure that what we say elicits constructive and inviting, generative possibilities for others, rather than exclusive or closing down possibilities for others? There are many connections here. I mean, one, just to make it a little more concrete while I have the floor for a moment, in my classes, I mentioned two things that have happened recently. Just this last week was my first week back in classes, and two things. One is I start my calculus class as an introduction with a reading of the introduction of Eugenia Chang's X plus Y book, right? Because obviously gender matters a lot to my students in general, to young people nowadays. And Eugenia does an excellent job at demonstrating how abstract mathematical thinking can act as a lens, to use Hawaii's perspective, right? To inform the way we see the world. It has at many layers. This is useful, right? To, for example, not conflate the world with our model of the world, but also to demonstrate that there are multiple ways to see the world, and they each have different advantages, and they're not, even though they might appear incompatible with one another, the world can accommodate multiple ones, right? Multiplicity. And so, we've had very deep, insightful conversation. Eugenia's writing is, obviously very evocative. And so this is something we seek to emulate. And she was there last year at our session to talk about that as well. But they got my students, some of whom are freshmen in high school, right? Like 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds, to engage with this material, to talk about what it would be like to see things not as a set of attributes that they have, but a set of relations that are elicited from other things, like a network of relations, that meaning of new things. For example, they'll try to understand what an integral is, or what an infinite series convergence might be, or what an infinitesimal might be too. I'm looking at Irfan here. And to understand that rather than a list of definitional attributes, instead as a set of relations, or how they act with other things, rather than try to pin down what it isn't, like to say, oh, it's just a unique thing, to instead open their minds to the possibility that anything that can relate to other things in this way is good enough. There's no further reduction that I can make to the thing itself, right? So anyway, that's one call out to the difference this way of thinking has made in my classes. Another one is, this spring I'm teaching again my quantum information class, and obviously we've had speakers who couldn't be here, Bob Koch, for example, and Pavel Subotinsky, who specifically talked about the diagrammatic ways of thinking about algebras and other models that we use to represent the world, like in this case, the world of qubits and quantum information and quantum algorithms. So one of the things that I say early on to that class, and really resonates with the students, is that this transition is one of moving from answers to Q&As. In other words, instead of construing the world as being populated by facts that just are, they're just answers. They exist already, right? Instead, to see the world as fundamentally populated by just questions and answers. The answers don't exist until the questions are asked. And in fact, so this is relational, but it's also compositional, in the sense that you can compose questions before you answer them, right? And of course, that matters a lot in quantum information, where the order in which you ask the questions and how far you postpone the answer can make a big difference, right? But opening, your mind to the possibility that might be a way of being, that this is something you hadn't thought was possible before, that maybe you can think of it this way, has again been transformative in my classes. That, rather than thinking that there's a set of facts, like answers that I can give them, it's more about how, what questions you ask and in what order you ask them. These are just examples that I want to demonstrate how in my own practice, the ways of thinking of the group have transformed, I think, the effectiveness of my teaching to my students. At this point, I want to open it up to anyone, really. I'd love any comments, and especially what would you hope for this group to do going forward in 2026? I want to be hopeful about this being an even better year. This is what deafening silence feels like. Are there themes you'd like us to explore? There are themes.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And see how it evolves. And yeah.
There have been some themes we've thought about leaning more into. We want to do more work, for example, with art, connections between art and mathematics, broadly construed, or ways of conceptualizing abstraction. We thought about doing more work with consciousness and ideas maybe of Buddhist practices or other conceptions, more spiritual perspectives on what understanding might mean and what compassion can mean. Just a few ideas. There are several others, but I wonder if you guys have any suggestions for things you might think would be useful for our space to entertain.
I think we had talked before that we want to be writing more things going forward, so that's perhaps going to be one of the focuses this year. But regarding writing, there are a few things we could revisit. For example, we mentioned the talk I gave on AI and math education 2 years ago. I feel like at that point of time, the technologies were so new, uh, and also I was a different, more young person at that time, that I have learned so much over the last 2 years that we probably could have another discussion on that. Maybe I don't even have to lead it. We can have it as a roundtable discussion, but that's something that's very time appropriate to revisit for us, because the question of how AI will impact math education is not something that has stopped being relevant. It will actually be more and more relevant until we settle down on some policies going forward. And if mathematicians do not actively talk about the policies, then the policymakers may not make policies in a way that is compassionate to mathematics as a field. So I think it's our responsibility to keep creating the space for having such discussions this year.
Yeah, I think certainly AI in various ways, including AGI. I mean, so certainly the education aspect of it, but I think even more broadly too, you know, the questions some people are asking, is AI, about to surpass us in intelligence? What difference does it make in our daily practices as mathematicians or any work that we do? Is it cognitive work, or is AI, something that can be mainly a valuable assistant, or is something that is just generally like a competitor to us? So to just use, David's analogy, are we to collaborate with AI or are we to compete with AI? Maybe that's but certainly
I don't even know
minds.
what competing with AI would be like, because I don't think we should realistically compete with a technology that will eventually surpass our abilities.
No, I agree,
it-
but many people think of it that way, that they're after getting us, or whatever. Like there's some sort of competition. We can do more things than they, or they can do more things than us. Yeah, I agree with you. We shouldn't see it that way. But validating the fact that people do see it that way. There's a reason why very intelligent people and ways of understanding the world. For example, in looking at jobs, right? Like the economists who rightly worry about how many jobs there will be, what kinds of jobs, who has access to the jobs. Maybe they're oversimplifying, but they have a point when they're trying to worry about what kinds of jobs AI might be used for and who will use them, the AIs. So I'm not pushing back. I'm just saying, AI is clearly on people's minds, and many of us are trained in computer science. Not me. I'm using the royal we, but I'm not. But certainly I interact with it, and I have my views. So that's certainly a theme to talk about. Another theme, by the way, that I've thought about a lot. This is of personal interest, and I have some people in mind. But we'll see how it goes. Is the idea of language and linguistics. I gave a talk also at JMM about that, but the idea of it means a place on the one hand where the methods we're talking about, the mathematical methods from category theory, diagrammatic methods, and so on, have been making a big difference in understanding language better, both understanding language as a tool to teach others, including AI and humans, but also as a window into understanding itself. Like, what is it? Because language is such an integral part of the human experience, of how we communicate, how we make sense of things. right? So personally, I find it very interesting, and there are some people that that might contribute and enlarge the conversation around that. What do we mean by the things we say? What does it mean to mean anything with what we say? What is it that AI doesn't mean, for example, or things like that? That could be another direction of interest.
I have a project in mind for the Artictionary, and it looks something like this. The group would send out a request for images and diagrams, sort of like a call out to artists for an art exhibition. And what we would be aiming for would be listings in the Artictionary of an assortment of the isms, biases, racism, sexism, xenophobia, da 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 da. Take your pick. And the contribution of the mathematicians with the diagrams and the artists with their visual imagination, and then the artists, mathematicians like Irfan, they would then describe these isms relationally. The point would be to help understand what its inner structure is, and then how, through a process that is complex and dynamic, it issues forth in anti-racist, racist attacks, and so on and so forth. But that the point be to use the Relatorium and the Artictionary and a whole vision as a way of both breaking down what these things are and then showing how they can be recomposed relationally so that they don't seem quite as overwhelming and threatening.
Thank you, Grady. That's a good idea. It's a new initiative. I would like, and I had in mind some speakers to invite on this, but to reintroduce the idea of art as an abstraction level, as a sense-making mechanism. But your idea of also, this is new. We haven't done this, but to do a kind of a invitation for an exhibition, maybe online, maybe even physical, but soliciting, if you will, art pieces and diagrammatic descriptions or otherwise, abstractions, to get at the sense in social interactions. It builds certainly on Eugenia Chang's work, and I'm sure she would be very interested in this. But yeah, another thing that comes to mind, you mentioned isms. Previously I was talking about the quantum formalism that the British science writer Philip Ball, that I really value a lot and like reading, talks about how in going to the quantum realm, you have to move from isms to ifms, in the sense that, again, it's not about the things that are, but the if-then statements that are very mathematical, right? Like literally, reality isn't populated by things, but by relations, right? And I mean, this is a lesson. This is why I say that I call it quantum formalism, but it isn't about quantum. And Bob Koch, in his talk last October, made that clear. And Grady, maybe you can say a little bit more about the interaction you've had with him. But that it isn't just about quantum. This quantum information revolution is an example where thinking more broadly about mathematics and formalism can inform a way of thinking about the world, right? That in other words, it isn't just a quantum realm that's populated by these if-then statements or the Q&As, but maybe we can construe the whole world, all existence being this way. This is just an alternate window into how we think about even classical algorithms or other things about the social complexity, for example. I know, Grady, that you prodded Bob to talk about the implications to the social realm.
Yeah, when Bob gave his talk on quantum mechanics for kindergartners, I was just totally blown away. What I got a vision of is a high level of thinking and intuition and insight, wisdom and love that is part of our project, that he gave me a vision of that filtering down to the popular culture so that it would become accessible and mainstream. And the key here that he was talking about with his diagrams was to make what would be otherwise a concept, an abstraction, a visual sense and meaning by seeing relations and correlations, and that way you would understand understand better some of the quantum concept that eludes many people, like entanglement and so on and so forth. And then when Antonio Vassallo gave his talk about an existence without time and space as these sort of substances or contents or abstractions, but as a relational matter, it just gave me this sense of how relationality as a sort of uber lens or framework for looking at things. And then what came to mind is that people are assassinated, people are killed, buildings are bombed, are set on fire because the occupants of a synagogue or a mosque, that is a substance that you're dealing with. So, I mean, if you have the common understanding of the objects of the world as being objects, then you can fix that, you can point at it, and you can kill it. But if at some time in the imaginary future that the literacy in our culture and society is based on an understanding on the sensibility and the sense-making power of relationality, how are you going to kill a relationship? So when I said that, Bob paused for a moment and he said that it reminded him that he can give some time to the more social implications of his work. And he even went so far as to say that he would think about addressing the social implications along the lines that I was suggesting. And I was just overjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, we caught him at the right time because he's been rethinking where he makes the biggest impact. And after a few years of founding Quantinuum and making a big difference there, he's resigned and returned to more of his own creative practices, including music and writing. And I think that's, Grady, I think your comment at the time, I feel like really hit a nerve for him. And I can't wait to see this man can do a lot of things and make a lot of good. And so we count him as a valuable member of our broader community. I want to thank all of you for staying this long and also for contributing and really believing in the value of our efforts. I mean, this is, you know, there's no reason, there's no, you know, there's no force that's holding us together except our own willingness, right? We're not being coerced into this. There's no money involved. There's nothing. There's no structure holding us together except the fact that we have this joint belief, right? Some transcendent sort of vision. And we don't know. We have no way of knowing if it's the same between us. Probably isn't, and that's good. But nevertheless, we still have a sense of congruence, right? Of enough overlap that we feel like we know what we're talking about. There's something in common there. We don't have the words for it, but it speaks to us in some ways. And that, in my mind, that's what it feels like to do mathematics. You're communing with mathematics, right? With something that's common. It's there, right? It's bigger than all of us. It will always be. And yet we are, you know, we feel like we're in a journey together. And that's very enjoyable, especially for somebody at my age, you know, that's why I started doing this. And it's really literally every time we meet, I'm inspired. It gets my day going, and then I have to go and teach, and like I do today, for example. But I'll be much more interesting, I think, for my students with this mindset. So thank you very much for sticking with it. And I look forward to another fantastic year where you're all invited to contribute. Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye, thanks.
I just ended the stream. We can stay on if we want.